So, for everybody who is joining us, welcome to this excellent panel called "Standing Out in the Media Market," which is where our friends at the Washington Post are going to offer some advice to veterans who are looking into getting either their first job or other jobs along their career journey, and we're going to be talking with Peter Finn, Carla Broyles, Alex Horton, and Pheobe Gavin, who recently led our workshop on how to strategize your job search, is going to be moderating this panel. So Pheobe, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk about this topic with our fantastic panelists, and I'd love for us to just jump right into it. One of the big questions that I receive all the time as a career coach is, what are the skills that can make you stand out in such a crowded market where opportunities can be limited? What kind of skills are important for you to stand out, invest in order to stand out in the market? And I'd love to throw that question to you, Carla and Peter. I'd love to start with you, Carla, if I could. From your perspective, what are some of the most important skills a journalist should be focused on to build and stay relevant in the current industry climate?
Okay, thank you, Phoebe, and thank you all for joining us. It's really very exciting, certainly a very exciting time in media. And I would say that's pretty easy. You know, it's a multimedia skills is what happen for writers and reporters, especially to stand out in the industry. If you have skills in video production, audio production, how to work a camera, and these days that camera means your phone. There's a science to how to get really good pictures from iPhones and also Android phones. And so that's the big thing, is being able to be deployed anywhere and have all the technology right there at your fingertips and be able to use that technology. I mean, I would say it's pretty easy on our end to be able to stand out amongst people who would be great writers and great reporters and diggers into information. But if you have those technical skills, you would definitely stand out.
I'd love to hear your perspective as well, Peter. Do you agree with that? Are there any other things that you would add on as important skills for journalists to be investing in right now?
Yeah, well, I completely endorse what Carla said. I would just add that the traditional skills remain fundamental to what we do. So I would just single out a number of things for reporters to make themselves distinctive. The first is source building. It's really, really important that you get to know everyone relevant to your beat across the political spectrum, across the bureaucracy, in the activist groups. It doesn't matter. You need to know as wide a range of people as possible on your subject, and you need to be in touch with these people all the time. I mean, the best beat reporters that I see, they're having breakfast, lunch, and dinner with sources every week. Beyond that, I would say you need to immerse yourself in your subject. If you have a beat, you need to be the expert on that beat. You need to understand everything about it, the nuances, the complexities. So that is reflected in your writing. And I would say work on your writing. Writing is hard. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes study. But it's one of the things that distinguishes people. If you see something with real flair, you immediately stand out. So on top of multimedia and all the things you need today, I would just add those fundamental skills remain very, very important.
Yeah, those fundamentals are always going to be the foundation. That's why they're the fundamentals. And I love that you brought out a couple of examples of how to build those skills. And I'd love to go deeper on that particular aspect. It's great to have this list of skills that we know are really important for these journalists to be focusing on. But what are some of your recommendations for building these skills and taking time away on a regular basis to build these skills in a way that is both effective effective, but also efficient. Peter, you mentioned like meeting with your sources on a regular basis, and I'd love to hear if you have any other tips or ideas for how to make a practice of building these skills, especially the writing skill, because that definitely is one that takes practice.
Well, I would recommend writing frequently. I mean, write small. It's important to sources that you do these stories. So, you know, smaller stories lead to bigger stories. The more you engage with these people, the more they trust you. The more they trust you, the more they are likely to give you the breaking news, the scoop, the tip for a potential investigation. And all of these things will then lead you to build the body of work that is going to take you to the places you want to go. Obviously, when, you know, the people I am hiring generally are very, very experienced. You know, the national security team at the Washington Post is generally not a starter position. Alex can talk about this a little. You know, he was on the GA team at the Post, did a whole range of really interesting work, and then joined the national security team. So, you know, you build up both professionally, and you build up in terms of your journalism and its ambition.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I love how you pulled out that idea of like write small, write frequently. And that is definitely, at least in my newsroom experience, one that can be a bit challenging for reporters to really get excited about, is building that body of work. Those smaller stories that are about sort of the incremental changes in your beat, that are sort of the explainers of those basic concepts of your beat, can really contribute to that writing skill, but also building that body of work that shows that you have expertise and experience in covering that topic. And with that said, I'd love to jump over to Alex. You know, obviously, one of the most important skills a journalist needs to develop are story skills. And I'm sure that you spent lots of time on the GA team developing those story skills and continue to do so in your current role. Could you tell us a little bit about how you identify and sharpen angles, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome to my hotel room in Massachusetts, if it looks a little strange to you guys. Yeah, I think one thing is just letting your curiosity guide you to a story idea, or just a particular angle on something that's happening, you know, right now, or something that will continue to attract interest. You know, it sounds fairly easy, but it's really simple during the day, just to shut off your intuition and your curiosity to do whatever you're doing during work. But you have to be kind of really in tune with those things. And a lot of the times it's very basic questions of the 5 whys and how. And I'll give you a couple examples, couple military and non-military examples. For instance, the COVID outbreak that happened on the Teddy Roosevelt last year. You know, the big news story was, how did this happen and how many sailors got infected? And I stood back and I said, well, you know, COVID's a big story just generally. Here's a military story. And this was in April of 2020. So, you know, this was the era of everyone washing their groceries and not knowing how COVID spread. So I looked at the aircraft carrier itself and I said, you know, what kind of larger lessons are there? So I started talking to healthcare professionals and epidemiologists who had no understanding of how the military works, but they understand the spread of the virus. And I said, what kind of practical and unique things can this particular outbreak tell you? So instead of doing a story that was, here's the outbreak that happened on the ship, it's, why are some of the unique factors that led to this outbreak and what can scientists take away from it? So a lot of this is kind of challenging in the first place, because your curiosity isn't necessarily a news story. So you got to find that overlap of what you find interesting and what you can actually report out. And that was one of them. And that turned into a nice story that ended up being true. There were unique aspects to ship life that helped researchers understand the virus generally for the world, not just in the military. And one other example was the Beirut explosion last year. You know, we had a news story up pretty quick that here's this big explosion. Many people are feared dead. But I was watching the videos come in and, you know, there was a blast wave and there was red and brown smoke. And my first question was, what does this color mean? You know, I've seen lots of explosions. I haven't seen an explosion like that. So I reached out to some bomb experts. I reached out to explosive experts, and they said that looks like ammonium nitrate. You know, and that was hours before people were coming to that conclusion. So when we got a story up about this is what researchers are saying about it, here's what the smoke can tell you about it, that fills a natural curiosity gap that I had, that other readers had, and I believe for that whole day, you know, more people were reading that story than the breaking news story, because that other story didn't pick at those answers in a direct and simple way than a story about the smoke did.
Yeah, that's such an interesting example of how taking a step back into the side can help you come to a story idea that is way more interesting to the audience than the straightforward story. Obviously, that story needs to be, you know, written. That story still needs to get up, but once it's up, it's time to start opening the blinders and stepping to the side and stepping back and finding ways to sharpen those angles. And a big way to do that is, you know, having a conversation with your editor about the big thing that's happening in your beat, or sometimes the small things that are happening from day to day in your beat. And I'd love to turn it back to you, Peter. You know, an editor is definitely a key part of the story development process, and helping reporters sharpen angles is a big part of what you do. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the ways that the reporters that you have worked with, how you've helped them sharpen angles, and if there are any practices that some of our attendees can take away as they develop and refine their own story pitches?
So, you know, one of our colleagues, David Moranis, says, find the universal in the particular. So I think that's a really important principle. A lot of, particularly I find with younger reporters or reporters starting out, they come to you with a pitch that's like, I'm going to give you the whole waterfront. I'm going to tell you, you know, the history of mankind. That's the pitch. And I think the key thing to learn is that, you know, journalism is, the journalism we practice is daily, it's incremental, but we're trying to find particular ways into a story, whether it's a particular case, whether it's a particular individual, and whether it's a particular event that happened, that can give you what we call a hook to then talk a bit more universally about a subject. But you can't start out, you know, like you're a sociologist. You have to start out like you're a journalist. And journalists are looking for a little wedge into a story, whatever it is. It's just it can be a very small change, but it can lead you to report and tell some very big things. So I think that's the first principle when you're pitching people, is just find a very particular thing to pitch. Don't tell them you're going to, you know, give them the history of the US in Afghanistan. You're going to tell them a particular story about a particular interpreter who did a particular thing, and this is why it's interesting. So that's what I would advise, particularly younger reporters. The reporters I deal with are very, very seasoned. You know, we are discussing, you know, where we can take the story next, what's the next likely development, what can we dig out, how best can, if we've already settled on what we think the story is, how best can we tell it? What is the narrative arc to this story? Where do we begin? Where do we go? How do we end? What other elements, as Carla started out saying at the very, very beginning, that's a question we ask ourselves now. What video elements can we add to this? What graphic elements can we add to this? What audio elements can we add to this? Is there a different way of telling the story? Can we make it more of a photo story than a traditional narrative? So these are questions, you know, we ask ourselves every day, and we come up with different answers every day, because different stories are better told in different ways. And that's what makes this job such a pleasure. You know, every day is a new adventure and a new story.
That's a really great point, and it ties back to what Carla said earlier, that it's so important to bring in those multimedia skills and make sure that you're investing in those multimedia skills, because that's what allows you to think about stories through these different mediums, considering how the story could live if it was in video, if it was an infographic, if it was a photo story. And so that definitely comes together. We have a question from our audience. Ken asks, any particular advice for journalists who've been out of the field for a while but would like to return? And if anyone else in the audience has questions, definitely throw them in the Q&A box.
Carla, do you want to take that one?
Well, I can just start off by saying, you know, there are a lot of networks, places that are looking for freelancing, where you can, you know, build confidence in that work and build skills and clips that way. But also, you know, these days, you know, things that we didn't talk about decades ago was different verticals or different organizations and different news organizations that aren't traditional organizations, in which you can, again, seek out and write stories for them. There could be something unique in your area, in your neighborhood, in your community, that you can pitch those ideas because you're right there in the thick of it, and pitch those ideas. And many organizations are around today that will be very open to those pitches and you gathering and getting those clips. Another way is, if there aren't organizations that you seek out, but if people have started their own blogs and those blogs have been successful, and we've seen packets and applications in many of our jobs in which people show examples of the work that they've done in projects that they've started, you know, as entrepreneurial journalists who are not affiliated with an organization. That is the quickest way also to build those clips. And then you go from there. I mean, it's like the sky is the limit these days. You know, there are many opportunities to just start writing, start photo editing, start taking pictures, start all of that podcasting, and get those clips to go further later on. But I think it's kind of fantastic and very exciting.
I would just add very briefly that, because the questioner talked about being out of the field for a long time. And I think if you have been out of the field for a long time, you really are starting again. Yeah. And you have to think of it as starting again. And do all of the things Carla just said and build a new set of clips that will take you to the kind of position you might want to be in. I think if you are out of the field for a very long time and you just send in an application, say, hey, I'm back, it probably is not going to get the warmest reception. So I think you have to, you know, just think that you're beginning again and approach it that way.
Yeah, and I would also add that it's really useful to invest in your professional brand, making sure that you have a good website or a good LinkedIn. If you are going to be active on social media in a professional capacity, making sure that those are really polished, because those are some of the ways that you can be discovered, but also that when your application comes across someone's desk and they cock their head a little bit, they can head over to those digital properties and get validation that you are serious about this industry and that you are serious about the beat that you're working in. And so looking to work in. And so that's a really great way for you to get back in as well. I would love to talk a little bit about that hiring process now that we've sort of touched on that with a little bit of time that we have left. One of your responsibilities, Peter, is hiring reporters. Would I be right to say that you know, these story skills are one of the big things that you're looking for? And if so, I'd love to hear you give some of our audience a little bit of some tips about how to put together a pitch memo. That is a very common request for reporters who are applying for positions, not just on your team, but pretty much across the industry. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about what makes a pitch memo successful.
So normally when we're hiring someone, we ask for three things. So we ask for a set of clips so we can see what work the person has done. We ask for a resume, and we ask for a cover letter. So on the first, the clips, We normally look for 3 to 5 clips. What I am looking for is, did this break news? Was this a scoop? Was this an investigative piece? Does it show ambition? If I get a clip where it's like, I covered this court hearing probably with 10 other people, it really is not that distinctive to me. So I'm looking for something that's a little, shows ambition and shows that someone is deep into their beat and can break news. Secondly, I'm reading it to see, you know, how does the prose pop? Is it, you know, is it well written? Is there flair here? You know, is there a distinctive voice? That's the next thing that I'm looking for. But then I would move beyond that and move to the cover letter. The thing about clips is, you know, you could have a terrific editor who's transformed a pretty shaky first draft into, you know, a wonderful piece of journalism. The thing about a cover letter is that applicants generally write that themselves. It can tell you an awful lot, like how interesting is this cover letter? How well written is it? How much does it show I know what this job is and I'm telling you how I can do it and how I would do it. So the cover letter is very important to me. And then finally, the resume. I'm looking at, you know, what is the experience of this person, not just their journalism experience, but their life experience. So when I see that someone is a veteran, that is going to immediately pique my interest, and I am going to give that person a closer look for a potential position, as even if it's an internal hire, as it was with Alex, or it's an external hire, someone we don't know at all. So those are the elements that I'm typically looking at when I'm going through resumes. And if we have an opening, I am going through sometimes an awful lot of them. So you need to catch my attention pretty quickly. So I need to start reading that story and start enjoying that story. I need to start reading that cover letter and be engaged by that cover letter. So I would tell you, don't dash these things off. Spend a little time on it. Have a friend look it over. You know, spell check it. You'd be surprised that I get cover letters with spelling mistakes. I mean, that just is a bit of a turnoff.
Yeah, I would love to hear your perspective on this, Carla, and we'll just go over a couple more minutes since we had to start a little bit late. What are your recommendations for either cover letters or pitch memos?
Well, I would say that the big thing, I mean, Peter described it wonderfully, but also impact, you know, definitely with any piece of paper that you are submitting to a journalism organization, we're going to want to know how you write. And it's going to tell us an awful lot. Like you said, spend time with that. That is a written piece from you. But the other part of that is impact. So sometimes we have people who can write well, but it's just a regurgitation of the resume. I did this, and then I did that, and then I did that. And I don't know if your story broke news in this town you were in. I don't know if the city council chair had to step down because you did this thing. I don't know that you that the organization's writers were reaching 3 people, and then you came on board in the audience team, and now they're reaching 30,000. Like, tell me quickly how things changed or were better because you were there. And it doesn't have to be about taking governments down. I mean, I know people sometimes may feel like they're applying to the post, and so if they don't have that kind of story, then it's not a story that we're going to be paying attention to, but it's impact. And based off the community you're in, that impact can look a lot of different ways. And so tell us what happened and what changed because you were there.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I'm really glad that you highlighted that impact can look like a lot of different things, and impact can happen at lots of different scales. And that as long as you are demonstrating that your reporting has an impact, that is going to be a lot more effective than just talking about what you did. I just want to say thank you to our panelists, and thank you so much to all of our attendees. My recommendation to each and every one of you is to find an action that you can take today to take some of this advice that you've received from these, practiced, celebrated, accomplished journalists, and you can bring them into your own career so that you can move yourself forward. Don't have this just be a situation where you sat back and listened to some people talk, have it turn into action. And I challenge you to take some action today to move yourself forward. Thank you so much again to our panelists.